So, it does matter how you treat people. And, I don't tell people their penis is too small or haha, you have a black eye or you're too skinny or you stupid shirt or any of those things. It detracts from the reason I'm here, the argument. You do deal with it a lot, and sometimes you get into psychoanalysis and things that seem relevant and can be often, maybe not often, but do end up being relevant. And yet, you can still resist from just taking the leap to just random, you fucked your dog kind of things. And it is important. People do that, they want to distract from what they're really saying. It's from their fear. It's whistling past the graveyard, which is a metaphor for people distracting themselves so they don't have to look at their own fears. It's useful to talk about this stuff with anybody, and I like talking about philosophy of science, which is a good area to talk about, systems where people's philosophical drives, like Gary's, make him want to have another system, basically, his intuition. Now, I freely admit that I have intuitions and things like I turned out I was very happy about relativism because it shows the truth of individuality. We all seem like we have this universe centered just because of trivial relativism, but it turns out there's a fundamental truth to that in Galileo's science, which turned out to be true. We don't know the whole story, but we know enough of it to know certain things aren't true. We've law of exclusion. We've excluded certain possibilities. But there's a lot of other ideas that I also would have liked to be true that just didn't pan out. And there's many things that I was told in my science education and other education that I didn't accept, and I came up with different ideas, followed different traditions. So, but it still is interesting to have a chance to talk about, philosophy of science, the practice of natural science, different, even absurd ways of doing it. And I'm willing to acknowledge people doing that, putting their position in words. But I'm not going to validate the results of what they come up with. That I'm just going to critique and talk about as an idea. Now, it can be quite productive, and that's such an example is the purpose of this video. So we're talking to Hythloday, I understand a couple things. One on fields, but also let me say first this one thing about like when you square a number, afterwards you get the result. You can't tell from the result whether the number was negative or positive. Even if you know the number was squared, you've lost that information of the sign of the input. And he was saying, well, in the neurological pathways, it either was negative or positive, and so there's these trails of implications. And so, in some sense, it's still encoded, and you could find out. That could be true, but this is just to point out the distinction. The idea of quantum erasure is that no, you can scramble information so that, for example, in this example, a year later, there's no record of in the brain of whether it was negative or positive, right? So once that's gone, right? So that information can be discarded or really just turned into heat, turned into noise. So that's that idea. But also, I think I finally got something about Hythloday's problem with the field concept and how, from my point of view, it's related to the fact that fields are used a little too willy-nilly. It's like with a field, putting another field in an equation is to add to the dimensionality. So you can reverse engineer and just make, like Ptolemy's rings inside of rings. You can just create these mathematical devices. And if you can have as many as you want, if you have an infinite number, then you can simulate anything with an alternate mathematics. And if you have a big number like 10, you can simulate a lot. So, so I think that's a valid complaint about fields as far as having ontological reality, and especially when you go ahead and then talk about properties of fields, as if a particle is a property of a field. I wouldn't say that's the right word. So I definitely don't think we're on the same page in terms of how to deal with space, and there's still a big divide about. I'm not mapping out the outside world the same way that I'm mapping out the information I actually have to work with, right? What kind of experiment can you create so you can repeat an experience? So the truth is between your theory and the data in that stream, not between your theory and some external world, except insofar as we define the external world as whatever's creating this stream of information ultimately. Right, so one way I wanted to put it was this, and I'll just finish with this, the Hythloday. I think when I say I believe in fields, I actually believe that there's a field. It doesn't matter how complex it is, and it could be many dimensions, but it is kind of by definition an assumption of where that meaning's been placed. Its extension is space and everything in space and all the fields together. And I don't think I'm alone in this. This is, why there's this is what it means to have the unification theory, right? Where all of these things somehow are explained as one thing. And that one thing can be pretty complex, so you'll also be able to decompose it into separate things, right? Orthogonal things like x and y. So I don't want to promote abusing mathematics because it's so easy to play with, though. On the other hand, you have to remember, I think mathematics is a language for defining these patterns of relationships between various perceptions, right? It's a language of patterns, and it's not really about what's making this stuff happen. When you're talking about the mathematics, you're talking about how it's behaving. The theory of what's making it happen, well, I think it's like coordinate systems, polar and Cartesian. I think in the end, there's multiple explanations that will be compatible with reality, and the certain problems will be easier to calculate with one coordinate system, and other things will be easier to calculate with the other coordinate system. And so to get even one system that works well is good, and when you have another system that works well, you're still not obligated to throw away the first system. I mean, look, we know general relativity works more accurately than Newtonian mechanics, but we still use Newtonian mechanics. And that's when one really is better, when you have polar coordinates versus hyperbolic coordinates versus Cartesian coordinates. It just depends on the problem at hand, right? And the tools. The circle has a really simple equation in polar coordinates. It's a little more complicated to do with Cartesian coordinates. So that might change which system you use. Whereas what's really out there in reality, what's reality compatible with, is our question when it comes to mathematics. So anyway, cheers.